Most people know that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand set off World War I, but few know this controversial royal's incredibly dark history, or the disturbing collection that filled the rooms of his Bohemian castle. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, a prominent member of the Habsburg dynasty, was heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne before his life was cut short, the catalyst for a chain of events that threw the entire continent into chaos. But even before he altered the course of history, the Archduke's life had already been more than dramatic enough to make the history books. Franz Ferdinand was born on December 18, 1863 in Graz, Austria. He was the eldest son of Archduke Karl Ludwig of Austria and nephew to the reigning emperor Franz Joseph. The emperor's son and Franz's cousin, the crowned prince Rudolf, was heir to the throne, meaning France was destined for a pampered life as a peripheral royal figure. But he began to climb the ladder of succession nonetheless. In 1875, Franz's cousin, Francis Theaive, Duke of Modena, met a tragically untimely demise at the age of just 13. Knowing his end was coming due to illness, Francis agreed to name Franz his heir, making him duke at just 11 years old. But the title was not his only prize. Despite his young age, Francis V had possessed a substantial estate, all of which he left to his cousin. Upon assuming the role of duke, Franz also inherited his cousin's vast fortune, making him one of the wealthiest people in Austria. There was more tragedy in store for his cousins. However, Franz's life changed in an instant in 1899, when his cousin, and heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Crown Prince Rudolf, took his own life with his young lover. Now, with no living male children, Emperor Franz Joseph's succession fell to Franz's father, Karl Ludwig. But the elder Ferdinand would never get his chance to rule. Emperor Franz Joseph was the picture of health, but his brother unfortunately possessed no such constitution. By 1896, Karl Ludwig had contracted typhoid fever and perished shortly after. Franz Ferdinand's life would never be the same again, and with that, France was next in line for the throne. On May 19, 1896, he became the heir presumptive of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But despite this massive responsibility hoisted on him, the young heir still found time for leisure. Franz was an adventurous young man and undertook many long and often arduous journeys to see the world. In 1892, before assuming the role of heir presumptive, the young Franz embarked on a circumnavigation of the world that would last over a year. This included a stop in Australia, where he embarked on numerous trips to the bush to hunt emus and kangaroos, which gave Franz a taste for the hobby. The young duke arrived home a changed man. Franz had a tense relationship with his uncle, Emperor Franz Joseph. The emperor greatly disliked how his heir would insert himself into political matters, and was not fond of his outspoken views, nor of how pushy he was with his policy ideas. Conversations between the two men would often explode into heated shouting matches. But Franz had other areas where he could exert his influence. At the time, most males in the ruling Habsburg line entered the Austro-Hungarian army at a young age. This was no different for Franz Ferdinand, who took on his role in the armed forces with great enthusiasm. His climb through the ranks reflected the mutual eagerness the army shared for the young Archduke. Franz excelled in the armed forces, though his service would not have looked much like that of an average infantryman, and he received a series of rapid promotions from a young age. At just 14, he received a promotion to the rank of lieutenant. By 22, he was a captain, a colonel at age 27, and at the unheard-of young age of 31, the Archduke attained the rank of Major General. As well as his army roles, the Archduke also held honorary ranks in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. The Navy apparently valued his input because the institution granted France the rank of admiral. Armed conflict would be where he left his greatest mark, just not how he was expecting. By 1913, the emperor was aging and increasingly unable to fulfill his duties. To lessen the burden on the elderly ruler, France was appointed Inspector General of all Austro-Hungarian armed forces, and was more than happy to take up this powerful position. Tensions in Europe were reaching a boiling point, and the Inspector General role included presumed command in wartime. But the Archduke was just as headstrong in his romantic life as he was in his career. In 1894, Franz Ferdinand began courting Countess Sophie Chotek, and with her controversy. The Choteks were not a member of a reigning or formerly reigning family of Europe, which meant France was not permitted to marry Sophie. Because of the scandal it could bring to their families, the two kept their relationship secret. However, their private affair was soon discovered with reaction, as you'd expect. The revelation of the Archduke's relationship with Sophie caused scandal and conflict within the imperial household. The emperor in particular was quite disturbed by the controversy. He felt the relationship was below the heir to the throne. But France held steadfast. By the time their relationship emerged publicly, France was already deeply in love with Sophie. Standing by his woman, he refused to consider marrying anyone else. The Archduke remained stubborn in his convictions, and the emperor eventually relented. After much argument, France finally wore the emperor down, and in 1899, the reigning monarch agreed to allow the Archduke to marry Sophie the following year. However, the marriage in 1900 would be a morganatic one, meaning that several restrictions were placed on Sophie's position. This did not bode well for France's descendants. Chief among the stipulations of the morganatic marriage was the issue of succession. Sophie and France both had to agree that because Sophie was not of noble enough blood, the couple would have to denounce any of their descendants' right of succession, meaning their future children would never be emperors like their father. Yet, this was just the beginning of Sophie's humiliation. As part of the agreement, the Archduke's new wife would see her position severely curbed. Sophie could not share her husband's precedence, privileges, rank, or title. Furthermore, they forbade her from appearing publicly beside him, and banned her from sitting in the royal carriage or theater box. After agreeing to all this, the pair wed, but the family still had to add further insult to injury. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Sophie Chotek married on July 1, 1900, in the Bohemia region of what is now Czechia. However, it was a sparsely attended ceremony. The emperor refused to show up to the scandalous union, and none of France's brothers, nor any other archduke for that matter, were in attendance. Sophie's future had its ups and downs from there. Sophie and France had 4 children in total, though only 3 survived. The Archduke loved his family deeply, describing his children as his whole pride and joy. He also felt his wife was his everything, and the two rarely left each other's side. In autumn 1913, the Archduke and his wife embarked on a trip to England. There they spent a week at Windsor Castle with King George V and Queen Mary, before heading to the countryside to spend another week with the Duke of Portland at Welbeck Abbey. It would be a dramatic excursion. While in the English countryside, the Archduke could not pass up the opportunity to go hunting. But while game hunting on the Welbeck estate with the Duke, one of the loaders holding a rifle collapsed, causing the firearm to discharge. The stray shot narrowly missed the Archduke's head. The Duke of Portland would later wonder if World War I would not have happened if the Archduke had perished that day. But fate had much bigger plans for Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, the Archduke and his wife visited Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Early that morning, a member of Young Bosnia, a group of separatists seeking to end Austro-Hungarian rule in the country, threw a grenade at the Archduke's motorcade in an attempt on his life. The grenade, however, detonated behind the imperial couple, injuring the occupants of the following car. The royals scrambled for shelter. The Archduke and his wife escaped to the Bosnian governor's residence, where France darkly jested, "So, you welcome your guests with bombs." However, After the chaos had settled down and the situation brought under control, the imperial couple insisted on going to visit those injured in the attack. Their kind gesture would be their undoing. The motorcade set off from the governor's residence, but no one had informed the drivers of the change of plans to visit the hospital. Upon discovering the change in itinerary, they had to turn around. Backing onto a side street, the line of cars stalled right across the road from where 19-year-old young Bosnia member Gabrielo Princip was sitting. The young man couldn't believe his eyes, and he was not going to miss this opportunity. Gabrielo dashed across the street, approached the car, drew his weapon, and opened fire into the back seat. The first shot struck Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit France in the neck. Witnesses immediately detained the assailant while the Duchess screamed for her life, and the Archduke leaned over his perishing spouse, attempting to comfort her. It was the beginning of the end. By the time witnesses arrived to administer aid to the imperial couple, Sophie was almost gone. She would draw her last breath on the way to the hospital. France was still alive, though his wound was bad enough that nobody held much hope. But he fixated on only one thing. As he laid bleeding out, all France could do was attempt to muster the strength to convince his wife to go on. His final words to her were as tragic as they were hopeless. He cried, "Don't die, darling. Live for our children." The tragic irony is France himself may have lived if not for one painful detail. As his aides attempted to open his jacket for better access to his wound, they could not do so without cutting it open with a blade or scissors. It turns out the outer lapel had been deliberately sewn to the inner front of the coat in an attempt to improve the Archduke's public appearance with a smoother fit. Whether he could have been saved without this jacket, we will never know, but it did prove an obstacle, and the Archduke perished within minutes of the attack at age 50. Unfortunately, the dramatics were just beginning. With tensions already high in Europe, the attack on the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne caused them to boil over. What followed was a series of diplomatic and defense escalations, later known as the July Crisis. The issue of the murder weapon proved pivotal. It was soon discovered that the firearm used by Gavrilo to take the Archduke's life came from a member of the Serbian Army military intelligence who held Yugoslav nationalist views. Wanting to quash this movement and viewing it as an existential risk to the empire, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia shortly after the declaration of war after the Archduke's demise led to a series of events that further escalated tensions. This all culminated 4 weeks after the precipitating event with the allies of Austria, Hungary, and Serbia all declaring war on each other on July 28, 1914, kicking off what we now know as World War I. But the million-dollar question remains, was the assassination of the Archduke really the cause? Well, it depends on who you ask. As mentioned, tensions in Europe were already at a breaking point, and many attribute the continent-wide arms race, nationalism, imperialism, the militarism of Imperial Germany, and the alliance system as further catalysts for the outbreak of the conflict. Still, most historians feel that the Archduke's untimely demise is the most immediate cause of World War I, cementing the man's place in history forever. But there is more to him than one moment, and there's no better representation of that than the disturbing collection he kept in his Bohemian castle. If you recall, during the global travels of his youth, Franz Ferdinand took up trophy hunting with an unmatched fervor. Even by the standards of European nobility of the time, France's fondness for the sport was excessive to say the least. His astronomical numbers reflected this. France kept track of all his successful hunting exploits, and his hit list reached an eye-watering figure. According to the Archduke's own records, he recorded 272 Sadun, 511 confirmed game kills. Around 5,000 of these were deer, and he displayed his conquests proudly. The Archduke kept his trophies on display for everyone that had the honor of visiting his cluttered estate. In his castle, he exhibited around 100,000 animals he had slayed. Those ranged from wall-mounted deer antlers to truly ghastly pieces such as the foot of an elephant used as a waste paper basket. This grim display of wealth and domination of nature certainly aligned with the personality of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose violent death catalyzed one of the deadliest conflicts the world has ever seen. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factate, for more incredible facts about everything.